All right, welcome back, everybody. We are in session 3 now. This is just flying by.
Flying
Up
by.
next, we have one of the talks I have been looking forward to the most since we announced this. This is a dear old friend of mine, old in the sense that we've known each other for over 20 years, plus he's not getting any younger. Mr. Bryce Johnson is joining us from Seattle to talk all things Xbox and accessibility, and we are very excited to have him. So, hello and welcome, Bryce.
Thank you. It's great to
I'm
be here.
excited to have this talk and the other two gaming talks. I think that's great for ID24 to be talking about gaming even more than we have before, and to have 3 talks and an Xbox talk, because I'm not much of a gamer, but that is the one console that I do have. So I'm interested in learning more about what's going on for accessibility for Xbox.
Well, how about we shut up and we let Bryce tell us all about it.
Alrighty, it is
All right,
all
Bryce,
you.
we're gonna hand it off to you.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for having me, actually. It's great that there are so many gaming talks. I've been at Xbox for 5 years, and for the past 16 months, I've been pretty focused on exclusively bringing Microsoft assistive technologies to the Xbox One console. So what I'd like to sort of talk about in this talk and show you is actually I'm going to demonstrate a bunch of these ATs, and we're going to talk about how we have approached them for a console versus a PC. So what is appropriate to be familiar, so having a PC user, a familiar experience for a PC user, and what is contextually appropriate for a gaming console. And once we kind of get through that, I kind of hope to sort of give you an idea of what I'm thinking about for the future of inclusive gaming, and what we can hope to do at Xbox. I can't spoil anything, so I'm not going to tell you any kind of plans, but I can certainly give you an idea of what we're thinking about. So I'm going to shift now into my console. So I'm going to share the screen and go into my console. So everyone pray for me that this demo works. Okay, you should see a picture of a controller. Anybody see that? Can someone tell me if they see that? All right. Good. Okay, perfect. So this is the Xbox One. This is my personal Xbox One at home, and right now we're on the home screen. And what I'm going to do is I'm first going to just take you through the Xbox One home and just give you a bit of an overview, and then we'll jump into some of the AT that we've developed for it. So on the home screen, we have basically the resume tile, which is here, which is right now showing a media player. And as I kind of scroll down the screen, you can see like there's a browser, and then there's this accessories app, One Guide, which is our way to view TV shows. I have Netflix here, and I have a bunch of pinned apps like My Games and Apps and some other things that I'm going to be showing today. So I'm trying to go slow so that people on the stream can see it. So next sort of section over is our community section. And this is where basically I can see where all my friends on Xbox Live are doing and kind of what's going on. I can see my buddy Nate here has been playing some Dark Souls 3. Ooh, he's been playing a lot of Dark Souls 3. This is Catherine playing Mass Effect. So I can see what my friends are doing on Xbox sort of at all times. The next sort of section I want to go into is one that we call One Guide. It is where we basically curate all the sort of TV and movies and things like that you'd like to watch. As some of you know, you can plug in your cable box into your Xbox One and control your cable box through the Xbox One. So making sure that TV adjustment is accessible has actually been a really high priority for us, and I'm going to demo some of that with you for Narrator in a bit. And the last sort of section is the one that, it's important. It's the store, so where you can buy games and things like that. So one last little bit. You see I kind of zipped over. Actually, I kind of did that too fast, so I'm going to get out of this for a second. We have what we call the guide, and it pops out of the left side of the screen. And this is basically really, this is what most people need for most of the time during their game. So when you're in a game and you need something, you can just pop into the guide and sort of see which friends are online, so you can see who wants to play. You can manage your party from here. So if you're playing online with some friends, you can manage your chat session. You can see achievements, read messages, things like that. So I'm going to take you through some of the assistive technologies now, and I'm going to start with Magnifier. So Windows Magnifier, some of you might know it's a screen magnification software that comes with Windows, and Xbox One is a variant of Windows. So we now have Windows Magnifier. It's a very kind of early version for us, and to turn it on, you hold the Xbox button on your controller, then this little thing pops up, and then you hold the View button, and then Magnifier turns on. Well, at least it should. There we go. So for this sort of first version of Magnifier, we can zoom in, we can pan around the screen, but that's really about it. And while it is certainly helpful for people to be able to do this, and they can do this within games, the challenge that we have with this initial version is that you can't interact with the UI while you're magnifying it. So it's mostly intended at this sort of minimum version of it to basically let someone go in, read something, and then they would turn Magnifier off and basically interact with the content then, so they could kind of see what they're going. We have a lot of great plans for Magnifier. It's going to be a challenge. I tweeted out earlier a URL to our feedback forums. It's vital for us that we get feedback from people on how these things could work or what ideas are needed for them. But we certainly would love to see things that we see in Windows, like being able to follow the focus while magnified, and being able to interact with the content while magnified. So yeah, that is a really quick kind of tour of Magnifier. So the next thing I kind of want to get into, let me just go back. Oop, too far. I'm flipping around too much. So I have this picture of a controller here, and I have this here to sort of talk about something that's really important for gamers that we implemented last fall, which is controller button remapping. So as you can see here, this is a standard controller, and it's labeled with the default sort of commands. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into our accessories app, and I'm going to show you how we can remap buttons on the Xbox controller and do a bunch of things. So this controller that I actually have plugged in right now is our Xbox Elite controller. I'm using this controller. I will show you basically the standard remapping that happens with all controllers, but then I wanted to actually show you some of the more advanced things that you can do with an Elite controller, which is really good. And you know, it's funny when people ask me. Let me just pop out of here for a second. When people ask me why controller remapping is so important, I often I often ask them to go to the Special Effect Instagram page. So Special Effect is a charity in the UK, and they help a lot of people basically make custom controllers. They do some amazing work, and they're a huge source of inspiration for me. And as you can see by some of these pictures, they actually take a lot of time to build a lot of really custom controller devices for people of all abilities, and that are tailored to various people's specific needs. So seeing this work and what Special Effect does, is super inspiring for us in Xbox, and specifically for the hardware team. So, making sure that we have like controller remapping feels like the least that we could do in some sense. So I'm going to go back in here, and I'm back in the accessories app, and I'm going to configure this controller. So I made a little profile called ID24, and I'm going to edit this profile. Oops. So the options that you can have for configuring a controller, let's go through button remapping. So when I go into button remapping, I can basically say, okay, there's my A button, and I can open this menu, choose the A button, which you can see there on the right, and the image of the controller, and I can say I want my A button to now be, let's say, left trigger. And the reason why someone would do this, or could do this, is often left trigger is shoot in games, and A is jump or something like that. So when you do not need the analog nature of a trigger, triggers on controllers are more analog than digital controls. Like if it's just something like shooting, you can kind of get away with it. You can imagine that a user could feel better by having less buttons to kind of deal with. So it's very possible that for certain games, people would want to remap their A button to the left trigger. Other things that you can do in this view, you can swap the sticks, so you can say that the left stick is now the right stick, vice versa. You can inverse the axes on the sticks, and you can swap the triggers. So you can imagine, like, if you're a lefty or a righty, you can just kind of go and do that. These options are available to everyone, and on any sort of controller. But now I'm actually going to take you through. I'm going to take you through what some of the special things that the Elite can do. And I'm going to start at the bottom with vibration. So when you go into our Xbox feedback forms, our ease of access feedback forms, oops. Oh, you know what? I moved left stick. That's funny. I have to restore defaults there, sorry. Oh, I've gotten myself in a little bit of a pickle. I've taken away the button that lets me confirm. Haha. Sorry, folks. 1 second. Let me just fix this. Okay. Sorry about that. Back to normal. So one of the biggest requests that we have in our Xbox Ease of Access forums is to eliminate, or to give people the ability to stop the controller from vibrating. Now there's tons of reasons for this. I'm sure you can kind of imagine for some people it actually kind of can cause them pain. So you can certainly do that with the Elite, and I'm going to show you, I'm going to hold this up to the mic so you can hear that as I kind of go down the page, the vibration kind of eventually fades. This one's a little bit harder to hear. I don't know if you can hear it at all, to be honest. But it allows us to basically give, with the Elite controller today, we can have the ability to turn vibration off, and we're seriously investigating how we can do that with every controller, because it is important and we understand why people need it. Next thing I'm going to show is trigger adjustment. So most people don't really, I think, realize that the triggers are what we would call an analog control. And what we mean by that is that, like, the harder you press them, the harder the more it knows how hard you're pressing it. And to kind of understand that, if you play a driving game where the trigger is the accelerator, the harder I pull on the trigger, the more gas I'm giving the car. So one of the things that we have in here is we have the ability to basically adjust the pressure zones of the trigger. So I'm going to set it back to 0, and you can see as I lightly press the trigger, you can see how much force I'm putting on the trigger there. So you can imagine if someone, maybe they wanted their triggers to not respond if they lightly touched it. So they want to basically eliminate that first part of the push, so that if they graze it, it doesn't necessarily fire. So that's a possibility. There's also the possibility of, like, maybe someone doesn't have a lot of hand strength and they want to be able to have that full power of a trigger without having to press it all the way. They want to be able to just press it lightly. So this is one of the things that we can do with the Elite controller. I'm not, and it's probably because of all the special hardware that we put into this particular controller. But this was one of the things that we developed for professional gamers. The Elite controller was developed for professional gamers, and then once it came out, it was one of those happy accident moments where the designers of the controller were like, wow, they understood that there was a lot of really great things in this controller for people of all abilities, specifically people with different motion abilities. So I'm going to do the same thing with the sticks. So much like the triggers, you can actually adjust the sticks on the controller to sort of behave differently. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you basically these profiles that we have around what type of stick user, or what type of, how I use the stick. And this one's aggressive, so it's basically saying that I push on this stick hard, basically. So you can see the range of motion as I kind of move the stick, and it's something that I can go in and sort of adjust this curve, and the user has a ton of ability to basically decide how much force they want to apply to the stick and what that actually does for them in the game. And lastly, we have this Xbox brightness button because, maybe you're sitting in your room at night and you don't want this thing to be really bright, which, I get. Okay. So even though we offer at the console level, with regular controllers and the Elite, the ability to do this custom remapping, it's very important that we continue to ask game developers to insert remapping into their game. Not everyone has an Elite. Not everyone can basically have a profile like this for each game that they play. So it's important for game developers to allow people to remap in their individual games so that the players of these games don't have to basically go back to the system every time they switch games. And sometimes, we don't know exactly what kind of remapping needs for every single game out there. So it's important for game developers to be cognizant of these needs and bring it into the game. Okay, so I'm going to go back out. And I'm going to show you Narrator now. So Windows Narrator, Microsoft Narrator, is our screen reader that we ship with Windows. And now we ship it with Xbox. So I'm going to turn it on. And to turn it on, I hold the Xbox button. And I hold the menu button.
Starting Narrator.
There.
Window.
You can also plug a keyboard into your Xbox One, any USB keyboard, and turn on Narrator the same way you would with a Windows PC. I'm going to get into a little bit later why you might want to do this, but for now I'm just going to kind of go through the standard sort of bits of Narrator and what we do. So before I kind of get into a demo here, Narrator is a little bit tricky for us in Xbox because I don't think it's controversial for me to say that the expectations of most modern screen reading experiences were born out of the need of productivity applications. And I think, much greater extent too, obviously, than the familiarity and the patterns of screen reading experiences in web browsers as well. So while it is super important for us that we keep conventions that help that make the screen reader seem intuitive by being familiar to people of these other screen reader experiences, we also need to make sure that we're intentional in that how we apply that to the console, because the console is a bit of a different experience. The one thing that I always talk about with my my colleagues in Windows is that the console is by its very nature fixed focus. It's linear focus. Everyone experiences the console the way most blind people experience computing, linearly. The one thing that we need to work on in Xbox is making this a bit more predictable for people, because while we do go through this console linearly.
Mirror's Edge Catalyst, primary featured section, 1 of 3. Non-selected, 1 of 3.
So we do go through this, we do have a linear focus model, but the challenge for us is that we do not necessarily organize everything into a hierarchical list. We use linear focus, but directionality can change based on the visual layout. So that's one of the things that we need to work on in the future, is making that a bit more predictable for people on how they consume the console. So I'm going to start off by going through this UI. You can see I'm in this little ads section here. You just heard. I'm going to bump down.
Free games and great deals, primary featured section, 2 of 3. Non-selected, 2 of 3. Sponsored, primary featured section, 3 of 3. Non-selected, Xbox accessories button.
So just like with any other screen readers, if I don't want to hear everything that Narrator is saying, I can move the selection. It will clip it. Clipping was very important for us because we definitely err on the console of being possibly a bit more verbose than you would imagine Windows to be. And again, that's because of the linear focus. So I'm going to go back into the guide.
Guide window.
And just sort of navigate the guide.
Selected, Party tab, 3 of 8. 3 of 8. Selected, Party tab. Selected, Achievements tab, 4 of 8. 4 of 8. Selected, Messages tab, 5 of 8. 5 of 8. Selected, Notification tab, 6 of 8. 6 of 8. Selected, Settings tab, 7 of 8. 7 of 8.
So pretty much what you'd expect from a list, sort of a tab list. And I think the challenge for us now is people have to learn that once they've gone down that list, to get into the section with a controller anyway, we expect them to basically bump.
All settings button.
We expect them to bump left.
Turn off console button.
Turn off console. So that's sort of one of the basic things that we have going.
Settings tab, 7 of 8.
I'm going to actually get out of this.
Home window.
And I'm going to go up.
Selected, home section.
To one guide.
Selected, one guide section, 3 of 7.
And I'm going to
3 of 7.
And I'm going to show you something that we intentionally kind of designed. I'm going to bump down into
Microsoft
app channels.
Live TV, movie, app channels. Find your favorites button.
So this interface that's coming up in app channels is how we display TV and TV show
Provider,
listings.
Fox Now. Press the Y button to collapse or expand provider listings. Button.
So I'm going to bump down into one of my favorite channels, app channels.
Title, Game of Thrones. Parental rating, unrated. Description, trouble is brewing in the 7 kingdoms of Westeros. For the driven inhabitants of this visionary world, control of Westeros' Iron Throne holds the lure of great power. But in a land where the seasons can last a lifetime, winter is coming, and beyond. Popular series, HBO Go button.
So a lot of what we do when we design these things for the console is we work with the teams that own these features to basically tell them this is what we think that this should read as, and this is the order that we think it should read as. And the reason why we ask them to change the order is that the visual order that the designer has laid out is not necessarily the most important information. And so when people use these lists, we want to give them the most pertinent information first, so that if they want to move on to a different selection, they can. So in this case here, you know, we left a lot of the stuff around the category, like you're in HBO Go, to the very end, and we said the title and the rating first, so that and we also, if it's weird, it's hard to hear it in there, but we actually also say the episode title when you're actually on an individual episode, so that if you know what you have, you can basically bump out quickly and get into something else. So in this case, like if I go to Silicon Valley.
Title, Silicon Valley, parental rating.
And I go, well, I'm not into Silicon Valley.
In the high-tech gold rush of title, Veep, parental rating, unrated, description. Senator Selina Meyer has just become the Vice President of the United States and discovered that the job.
So we can basically go in there and cut things off. So what I did there to actually cut that off, it might just to be sort of fully transparent. I have a keyboard hooked up to my Xbox. I have a USB keyboard. And I know how to I know the narrator command for basically telling narrator to stop talking is hold down the control key. So I just held down the control key on my keyboard and narrator stopped talking. You can use the keyboard and the controller at the same time. And lastly, what I want to show you is, with narrator in particular, is
title,
how...
Tonight with John Oliver. Title, Movies and TV. Title, Fantastic Four. Parental, one guide button, home window.
Sorry, I'm trying not to talk over narrator.
Home section, 1 of 7. 1 of 7. Selected, community, one guide section, selected, games section, 4 of 7. ID at, just Mirror's Edge, home front registered trademark, Overwatch, Origins Edition, store window. Button.
So, I went to basically a store
only button.
Detail page. And what you just heard was that focus is on the purchase button by default, and it says basically the bundle. In this case, it has to be in a bundle. So as I move the focus rectangle around this UI.
View Game Hub button. Rate button.
We need some enumeration there and some grouping, but.
Pin to home button.
I promise you we're working on that. So one of the things that some people might notice as I'm moving around and who possibly use this UI, there is actually text on this screen that cannot be focused on with the controller. It is inactive text, much like you'd see across the web and across Windows. And because of the Xbox's linear focus, we hit these parts where things can't be read with the controller today. So that's one of the reasons why it's important for us to work with the teams and properly craft these designs for them so that they properly append or prepend relevant text. But it's not the only way that people can get at this information. So as I said before, Windows or Narrator on Xbox One is Windows Narrator. So when I plug in my keyboard, I can basically go to my keyboard and start to use narrator commands to navigate this UI, like what we would call narrator focus. So I'm going to hold down the caps lock key.
Caps lock.
And I'm going to just flip through the narrator focus modes.
Landmarks and containers. Items.
So I'm now in item focus mode, which is the focus mode I want to be, and I'm basically going to climb the what we would call the UI automation tree of this UI. In web terms, it would be like climbing the DOM.
Rate button.
So I'm just going to...
View Game Hub button. Bundle only. Violence.
So
Use of tobacco.
now some of you might see this is very small, but the focus rect is bumped to basically beside the ESRB label, and it is reading the text for the ESRB rating. So it's saying that Overwatch has use of tobacco.
Blood.
It has blood.
Online interactions not rated by the ESRB. Image.
Yeah, we need to work on that image.
Editable text.
So using this mode on Narrator, it allows us to basically climb the tree, and it allows people to sort of see information that can't be read. It's not ideal, and one of the things we need to do is figure out how to enable this with controller. It is something that we're looking into because it is important. We know that it's how people, not just who use things like the web on our console, they're going to need that. So what I wanted to say also about Narrator is, and I just want to kind of get into this for a little bit, is that the team that works on Narrator, they're working really hard to make it a modern, useful screen reader. And because Xbox One is built on Windows, our Narrator on the console is essentially the same as the Windows Narrator. So when Narrator is updated for Windows, Xbox One gets many of those features as well. So if you'd like to see the future of Narrator and where Narrator is kind of going, the Narrator team has sort of mentioned what they're proposing in future versions of the product, and we will get a lot of those for free on Xbox One. It's just mostly us figuring out how we would apply them. So another area that I want to talk about with Narrator, before we kind of move on to the last bit of assistive tech, which is high contrast, is I wanted to talk about an area that I'm really kind of personally interested in, and I might just switch out of so you can see me. So I wanted to talk about this for a bit. When we talk about Narrator and we talk about how it works on Xbox One and not just Xbox One, and gaming experiences in general, one of the things that I'm personally looking at is how do we reduce verbosity through adding additional sonic affordances. So what I kind of mean by that is that when we design UIs today, people are really used to these rich visual UIs that have a lot of layered information. But when that comes to a screen reader, or when we design these screen reader experiences, they're intentionally mono. And there are reasons for that. I'm not saying that mono's bad. But what I am saying is that in a context of a game console, and in the context of entertainment, I think there's a possibility for us to explore sound as a way to give additional cues to people for how they interact with the UI. So to give you kind of a quick example of that, that enumeration of grouped lists, that item 1 of 10, is there a way that we can use sound to give the user that affordance so that we don't have to enumerate that list all the time? So how do we make our UIs richer and more layered, our sonic UIs richer and more layered? So there's a name for this that we have, and it's not my favorite name, but sometimes we call it earcons. So like icons, earcons. So how do we sprinkle those into our UIs? The reason why I don't think it comes up a lot when we talk about or when people talk about desktop and mobile experiences is that sighted people don't necessarily want a lot of their computers to basically be talking a lot, and they don't want a lot of noise coming out of their computers. So teams like Windows and the mobile people, it doesn't really come up for them. But for us on the console, sound is a given. I mean, this is a living room experience, and people expect it to basically be alive. And I feel like sound is something that we're really underutilizing. So I'm going to just switch back to the screen there. Actually, before I do that, I'm just going to do a little bit behind the curtain stuff and set up my
Store button.
Oh, I'm going to turn off Narrator.
Microsoft Edge. Recently played section button. Window. Exiting Narrator.
Okay, let's share the screen. Okay, I hope people can see that. So what I have here, this is basically two screenshots. The one on the left is a screenshot of the ease of access settings in Windows 10 showing the high contrast black, high contrast theme. And on the right is basically Xbox's interpretation of that theme. So they're not equivalent, and I'm going to really kind of go through why they're sort of not equivalent. For one thing, I have selection color and hyperlink color is the same, and because in my mind, the way that it works on our system with linear focus, that is a very sort of possible thing, and I don't necessarily see the value of repeating those things. So what I'm going to sort of take you through next, so let me show you an example of that in Windows. So this is the Windows 10 News app, and in high contrast. And so you can see that one of the things that you may notice here is that three items at the same time are blue. There's the home icon in blue, there is the all tab in blue, and then there is the taskbar icon on the taskbar of Windows. So the way that Windows interprets selected, it is true that all three of these things are selected at this point. But I have a slightly different point of view on how we should use selected, and I'm going to take you through basically our thinking on that. So these are our high contrast principles. This is what we kind of look to when we think about how high contrast should work on Xbox One. I'm just going to kind of read these quickly and then I'll go into them. High contrast is predominantly black and white. Structure must be evident. Important elements of the UI are emphasized when noise is kept in check. We use color in motion. We don't leave color behind. Backgrounds go black, content stays. So let me give you some examples of that. So high contrast is mostly black and white. If you've seen the Xbox console or any kind of, or what I've shown you today, we have a lot of color in our UIs, whether it's thumbnails of games, whether it's what your friends are doing and the things that they post, or just advertisements for games. There's a lot of color in this UI already. So I felt it was really important for us to make sure that that things were very apparent when in black and white, and that we used color with supreme intent, and we used it sparingly. So this little house on the prairie example, we're showing the selected color because that's where focus is at that moment. So the next sort of rule is structure must be evident. A lot of the times in high contrast UIs, you'll see basically people just put a white border around everything. Everything else will go black. But sometimes those borders don't necessarily convey the type of content that that you're trying to do. So for me being in design, it's not as simple as like kind of going through and saying, okay, put borders on everything. So we work with all the teams to make sure that when their UI is in high contrast, the structure of the UI is very apparent. People need to understand like what's kind of going on and what they can click on. So, next sort of principle. Important elements of the UI are emphasized when noise is kept in check. In this example, we basically have two screenshots. One of them is the keyboard. They're both of the keyboard, but one of them just basically has more lines than the other. So when we go into high contrast, we want to make sure that we're making sure that things are clean still, because again, extra visual noise doesn't help anyone. It's about intent. This last sort of principle I want to kind of go through is we use color in motion, we don't leave color behind. So what I mean by that is that I want that selection color. When a user sees that blue, I want them to know that that's where their focus is. By default, and like I showed you in the Windows example, in this, if we left it by the way that the system would want to do it by default, both the sign-in security and passkey button, which is the big sort of tile icon there, and the account tab, because that is the section of the settings app that you are in, would be blue. But that's confusing for people, so we decided that to show markers, we just want to use a different visual style, but make sure that they're black and white. So if you see color, if you see that blue, you know that that's where you're focusing. Sorry, I lied. I have one more. Backgrounds go black, content stays. So our UIs use a lot of transparency. When you go into high contrast, we want to make sure that that transparency goes away. We want to make sure that any image that's an embellishment can kind of go away, but things that are content should stay. And in certain apps, we're actually experimenting with swapping out high contrast assets, where it's kind of vital. So I'm going to go home, and some of you might see here that there's transparency, and I've got a little tree in the background of my home screen here. I'm going to go into high contrast, and I'm going to show you how it looks afterwards. So in settings, we have ease of access settings, and there's narrator and magnifier and closed captioning and high contrast. So I'm going to go into high contrast, and I'm going to turn it on. If you have a Kinect, you can just say high contrast on, but I've been saying Xbox so much in this presentation, I unplugged my Kinect because it would be going crazy every time I said Xbox. So now you can see that I'm in high contrast mode, and as I kind of bump down, a lot of the things have become opaque. We've removed certain backgrounds. We've left things in that are important. We have the blue selection color, and that's sort of how that works. So I've told you a bit, and I'm going to try to wrap up soon. I've told you a bit about how Xbox is different, but now I kind of want to show you a bit about why Xbox is the same as Windows. So we have a concept in Windows that we call the Universal Windows app, built on the Universal Windows platform, where developers can build an app that is responsive from a phone all the way up to a PC and a tablet to the Xbox console, all the way up to our 84-inch Surface Hub device. These apps should be able to respond to these environments. So while and Universal Windows apps will start coming onto Xbox later this year. So while it is important for us to be unique and to make sure that we're contextually appropriate to the Xbox One console, we also have to remember with our assistive technologies that people will be bringing on things onto the Xbox console that aren't normally there. Like I joke with my teammates, like we're going to get things like spreadsheet programs, and we're going to get things on the Xbox that we're not used to, and some of those things require traditional assistive technologies. And so while it's important for us to be unique where it's important, we also have to be sure that we're consistent with Windows, so that the experience that you have on Windows you can kind of bring back to your Xbox One. So I'm going to get out of screen sharing for a second. How are we doing for time? We look all right. So just on the example of gaming and the future of gaming, I just kind of wanted to say, like, Ian Hamilton's going to be talking about his guidelines, which are fantastic. He's going to be talking about the work that he does. One of the things that I see is, like, someone who works on the Xbox platform, the game developer guidelines are mostly for game developers, and I work on the platform. I work on the actual, the thing that the games get built on. So what I'm trying to work on is figuring out how we can build assistive technologies that make it easier for game developers to make their games accessible. And that's going to be tricky, because the one thing I can tell you about the console that's different from, like, a normal PC is that when you launch into a AAA game, like a, 10 or 15 years from now, you're going to have to a big title game, the Xbox gives the majority of system resources to the game. So, for instance, we can't run Narrator when a game is on. It's not really architecturally possible. But what we can do for that game is we can basically tell that game that the user is using Narrator, and we can work with game developers to figure out ways to have Narrator-type features in their game. And that's the sort of journey that we're on. And the same thing is true with high contrast. We talk with people all the time around making sure that they can understand high contrast. One of the things that that Ian and I have talked about a bit, which I think is really interesting, is how can games leverage platform things like closed captioning. I think that we have a lot of customization options in our closed captionings that I think a lot of people wish were in games, and it would be great if games could leverage our platform's closed captioning systems. It'd be easier for them, be better for our customers. And just kind of in closing, I kind of wanted to sort of, I tweeted out earlier, we really need feedback, and we have this forum where we love to get feedback on the Xbox One and gaming. So you can tweet me, but you're better off putting your feedback in the feedback forum, because that's where we sort of house it. And there's also an email address, xaccess@microsoft.com. I'll retweet that again. I tweeted it a little earlier today, but I guess that's it. Thanks so much for having me.
Wow. Bryce, that was awesome.
Yeah, I'm kind of just blown away. I don't really have anything to say.
I could tell you one thing, that probably about half the people watching this in the TPG room all want Xboxes now. That was, yeah, wow.
Achievement unlocked.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, we're running short on time for questions. Unfortunately, I don't think there were any because you did such an awesome job talking about it that there's really nothing left to ask. But I can definitely say that Twitter lit up during this one.
People can reach out. I'm around. We're always listening.
That's good stuff. I mean, honestly, I tweeted this during your talk. I just want to reiterate here. What I loved the most about this talk, I think, was your level of transparency. You were very honest about what you needed to improve on, and I mean, honestly, the stuff you guys have gotten right, you guys have knocked out of the park. And I think it's sort of indicative of this whole sort of, I don't want to say renewed, but I mean, just the stuff coming out of Microsoft lately is just amazing. Like, I don't know what you guys have done, but you need to teach the rest of the world what you're doing because you're really doing a great job lately.
Well, I mean, if you've seen the inclusive design materials that we publish, I mean, I work with that team daily, and my job is basically applying those principles to Xbox.
Good stuff. We do have one question from Twitter.
Okay.
Adrian Roselli, I believe, is asking where he can find documentation for these features. So
there is documentation on the support site on support.xbox.com. I wish, it could be better. I really want to kind of be honest. And one of the things that I'm going to try to do for the next time we release these features is do a little bit of screencasts on how to do them. I think when I talk with people who are blind around the screen reader on Xbox One, there's a number of them. They didn't know that you could plug a keyboard in to Xbox One and get the full functionality of Narrator. And I don't, that's because we don't publicize it enough. And it's in our support documentation, but who goes and reads support documentation?
Definitely not developer. So that's awesome. Okay, well, I think we're about out of time, but thank you very, very much, Bryce. That was awesome.
Thank you, guys.
For anybody who didn't see the beginning of the talk, I recommend you watch this after the other 22 talks or 21 talks are left.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's great. We'll make sure we get those links tweeted out for the feedback forums, and we'll take it from there.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right.
Have a
Thank
good
you,
rest of the 24 hours.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks. Bye all. All right, coming up next, everybody, at the top of the hour, what do we have up next? We have stuff. You'd think I do this for a living or something. Oh, we have
Yeah.
Sarah. Sarah Poulos is talking lessons learned from building accessible, complex web applications.
Cool.
So that's coming up in about 10 minutes or so. So we will see you all in the next room, URL, whatever it is we have here. We'll see you there. So pick up your books and head to the next cyber conference room. We'll see you there.
Alrighty. See you.